don't ever want to be that close to another vessel because too many things can go wrong and you can actually have a collision.
If China continues with that, then there's a greater likelihood of an international uproar.
The truth is that the United States is provoking troubles first, and China is dealing with it in accordance with international law.
A cordial handshake over dinner is no substitute for a substantive engagement.
It's undeniable that a severe conflict between China and the US will be an unbearable pain for the world.
Welcome to the show. We begin with the world's other pressing geopolitical hotspot outside Ukraine, the deteriorating relationship between two superpowers. The Shangri-La Dialogue, a high-level defense meeting in Asia, could have been an opportunity for the U.S. and China to have a much-needed conversation, but it didn't come to that. A handshake, a few words, that was it. And dialogue is needed now more than ever to keep tensions at bay. Fears of an escalation were stirred just this weekend when a Chinese warship crossed dangerously close in front of a U.S. destroyer in the Taiwan Strait.
This is the moment a Chinese warship blocked the path of an American destroyer, forcing the U.S. vessel the Chang'un to drop its speed and avoid a collision. The incident occurred as the United States and Canada were holding joint drills in the Taiwan Strait, a body of water that's already a sensitive waterway as it separates China from Taiwan. A Canadian official who witnessed it firsthand has called out China's actions as intentional and dangerous.
The fact that this was announced over the radio prior to doing it clearly indicated that it was intentional. Maneuvering close to each other, 150 yards, is very scary. And you don't ever want to be that close to another vessel because too many things can go wrong and you can actually have a collision.
The way China's authorities see it, Taiwan and the waters around it belong to them. They have blamed the US for provoking risk in the region.
The truth is that the United States is provoking troubles first, and China is dealing with it in accordance with international law. China respects freedom of navigation and overflight. But China firmly opposes certain countries causing trouble in the Taiwan Strait and safeguards its sovereignty and security.
The Taiwan Strait is part of the South China Sea, where China's naval posture has been growing increasingly aggressive over the last weeks, blocking the passage of a Philippine ship in May, then a US aircraft, and now a US destroyer.
You know, I've voiced my concern about the irresponsible behavior we've seen with close intercepts and the coercive behavior that we see in the waterways, and so that continues. I call upon the PRC's leadership to really do the right things to rein in that kind of conduct, because I think accidents can happen that could cause things to spiral out of control.
So far, China is defending its stance, but the country's leaders have also stated that a full-blown conflict with the US would be a, quote, unbearable disaster.
Rorry Daniels is the managing director of the Asia Society Policy Institute and in the United States and joins us tonight from New York. Welcome to the day, Ms. Daniels. The White House responded to the situation in the South China Sea with a grave warning. Let's have a quick listen to what John Kirby had to say.
It won't be long before somebody gets hurt. That's the concern with these unsafe and unprofessional intercepts. They can lead to misunderstandings. They can lead to miscalculations. When you have pieces of metal that size, whether it's in the air or on the sea, and they're operating that close together, it wouldn't take much for an error in judgment or a mistake to get made, and somebody could get hurt. And that's just got to be unacceptable. It should be unacceptable to them as well.
With so much at stake, what stands in the way of productive de-escalatory talk here?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons that both sides thinks that the ball is in the other country's court to, create a more favorable condition for productive dialogue. From the U.S. perspective, it's this military signaling that China is doing has created unfavorable conditions, and there's a real need to get back to productive dialogue to manage that. From China's perspective, the military signaling that the U.S. is doing has created unfavorable conditions for productive dialogue, and it's China's responsibility to curb some of its actions. So both sides are really in a downward spiral still, and yet some of the high-level dialogue that has taken place shows that both sides remain committed to kind of keeping the tone of the meetings that can take place productive. It's just not clear that they're ready to widen the scope of that dialogue to include military-to-military dialogue at this time.
Mm-hmm. You talk about a downward spiral, about finger pointing, and the U.S. has long insisted on creating guardrails to keep precisely that in check. Why is China so opposed?
Well, I think China is not necessarily opposed to the idea of managing the relationship responsibly. It's in, the operation of that management where we really have fundamental differences. So the U.S. thinks that guardrails on the relationship could include things like crisis communications talks between the two militaries. But from China's perspective, they feel that those types of crisis communication hotlines would not be guardrails, but would be seatbelts to allow the U.S. to continue to make these, what they see as very provocative moves, particularly in the Taiwan Strait. And, in other words, to give the U.S. a chance to de-escalate might empower the U.S. to continue escalatory moves from the Chinese perspective.
Mm-hmm. You say that military-to-military dialogues, maybe it's a little too early at this point, but there is dialogue happening on other levels. Last month, for example, the head of the CIA traveled to China. How much performance is there to all of this, or is it really as bad as it seems?
There's always a performative aspect to country relations. And the question really is, who are the two sides performing for? I think that there's a sizable domestic audience in the U.S. and in China that really wants to see their leadership stand up to what they see as the bad behavior of the other side. So I think underneath some of that performance, which, tends to take place in these press statements like the one you just played, there is this real sincerity that officials on both sides at a particularly high level do understand the stakes of maintaining a cordial and at least peaceful relationship. And they understand that not only, for the benefit of, their own strategies, but also because they know that the world is watching, that there aren't other countries in the world that want to see the U.S. and China go to war with each other. And so the audience is domestic, but it's also, the international community and the need of the international community to see these officials manage the relationship responsibly.
Let's talk about the other side of the performance, because China's defense minister also warned of future confrontation. Here's what he said.
The Cold War mentality is now resurgent, and it greatly increases security risks of bloc confrontation in the Asia-Pacific. Some big powers continue to promote their so-called Indo-Pacific strategy. China holds that no strategy should be based on ideological grounds, whose aim is to build exclusive military alliances against imagined threats. This could easily lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And he added that mutual respect should prevail over bullying and hegemony. How does that fit into China's behavior in the Taiwan Strait over the weekend?
Well, I think mutual respect is another term that really needs to be unpacked a little bit. It's kind of like guardrails. I think the U.S. has no problem in concept with the idea of mutual respect, but to the Chinese, mutual respect often means taking their position for granted, particularly when it comes to Taiwan. So what the Chinese say when they mean mutual respect with regard to Taiwan is that the U.S. and Taiwan should have no official relations or unofficial relations, and that the U.S. should accept China's position on the eventual resolution of Taiwan. And that's just not where the U.S. interests lie. So I think mutual respect, much like guardrails, is an area that the two sides need to unpack through direct and candid and hopefully constructive dialogue.
So while the tensions grow and the two countries don't seem to even speak the same language, many are worried, especially countries in Southeast Asia who are stuck between China and the U.S. in a way. What does all of that mean for them?
I think they're navigating a really tricky situation. I think even though the US and China consistently tell the region and the world that they do not expect countries to take sides in US-China strategic competition, the way that the competition is being displayed right now does force countries into the position of taking sides. So whether it comes to high technology export controls, or it simply is a matter of, maintaining diplomatic relationships with both sides. I think the countries of the region, and I think this was very much in display or on display at Shangri-La, I think the countries of the region are being forced and are feeling pressure to take a side in the US-China strategic rivalry.
So an uncomfortable situation. We don't have much time, but I do want to know if this is, in your opinion, the new status quo now that we're working with.
I think we're still in a period where dialogue can serve the function of doing no harm and making sure the situation doesn't get worse. And whether or not this becomes a maintained status quo will depend on what happens over the next year. We do have the possibility that President Xi Jinping will travel to the United States to attend the APEC summit in San Francisco in November. And I think our eyes should really be turned to what are the moves made over the summer in diplomacy to get to the point where the two leaders can sit down in person in the US and have a conversation about moving the relationship forward in a much more peaceful and sustainable manner.
Rorry Daniels, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.